Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's uprising.
One of the most famous events in all of Chinese history.
Exactly. And today, we'll be unpacking some excerpts from Qin Ershi and the Chen Sheng Wu Guang uprising, which really goes deep into this story. And as always, we're going to uncover some pretty surprising details.
Well, if you only know the version from a textbook, get ready to have your mind blown.
Haha, I love it. So, okay, let's set the scene. We're in the Qin Dynasty. China has just been unified, and Qin Ershi, the second emperor, is on the throne.
And he's not exactly known for his kindness.
Yeah, tyrant is more like it. But this source really goes beyond just calling him a tyrant. It paints this really vivid picture of his brutality.
He didn't just punish his opponents. We're talking massacres, purges, even members of his own family weren't safe. Imagine the fear and instability across the empire.
It's crazy. This guy was only 21 years old.
21, with absolute power. And, advisors like Zhao Gao whispering in his ear.
Ah, Zhao Gao, the master manipulator.
Exactly. Some historians think he was pulling the strings, using Qin Ershi to advance his own agenda.
So while all this is happening, Qin Ershi is also continuing these massive construction projects that his father started, right? The Yipeng Palace, all those roads and infrastructure.
All requiring huge amounts of resources and manpower, which means the common people are bearing the brunt of it all.
They must have been exhausted. I mean, they just gone through years of war and unification struggles.
Exactly. And they're hit with even more hardship, so it's no surprise that resentment is brewing.
Yeah. And things boil over pretty quickly. In 209 BCE, just 9 months into Qin Ershi's reign.
That's when Chen Sheng and Wu Guang enter the picture. They're stationed with a group of conscripts, and they decide they've had enough.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. Most people think of this as a peasant uprising.
Right, the classic story. But this source, it really makes you question that, because both Chen Sheng and Wu Guang, they had courtesy names.
Courtesy names. What does that mean?
It was a sign of higher social standing, something commoners didn't usually have. So some historians argue that they might have been dispossessed nobles, forced into labor.
Whoa. Sounds like a plot twist in a movie.
Right. But wait, there's another layer to this. Some scholars say that Wu Guang's courtesy name might simply be a way to indicate his birth order.
So maybe not nobility after all.
Possibly. And there's even a theory that Sima Qian, the historian who recorded all this, he made a mistake about Chen Sheng's courtesy name because of the pronunciation in the Chu dialect.
This reminds me of that story about Chen Sheng's old buddies.
Oh, yeah, the ones who bump into him after he's become king.
Exactly. And they're like, Heng Yi, Shesawei, Wang, Shen Shen. Like, they're shocked that their old pal, Shi, is now the king.
And so powerful. It just shows how dialects could have led to all sorts of confusion in historical records.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what else we've misinterpreted over the years because of language nuances.
Makes you appreciate how complex history really is, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So regardless of where they came from, there's no denying Chen Sheng's ambition.
Oh, yeah. It's clear from that famous story where he's complaining to his fellow farm laborers about being poor. They laugh at him, but he throws it right back at them. He talks about swans and wild geese having ambitions, so why shouldn't he?
I love that. Working in those fields day after day. It takes a certain kind of drive to even imagine something more. It's kind of inspiring, you know?
Definitely. And it challenges those Confucian values that were so important back then, right? The idea that you should accept your place in society, focus on being moral, not on getting rich.
Yeah, remember the ideal image of Shun, the sage who didn't care about wealth or poverty. Chen Sheng, he was definitely not content with just accepting his lot in life. He wanted more, and he wasn't afraid to say it.
Makes you think, right? How much of our ambition comes from within, and how much is shaped by society?
Definitely something to think about. But anyway, back to Chen Sheng. This desire for social mobility, it ends up clashing with the very system he's trying to overthrow.
The irony of rebellion, right? He wants wealth and status, but that just reinforces the hierarchy of the Qin.
It shows how complicated and even contradictory human motivations can be. But okay, before we go too deep into Chen Sheng's head, let's back up a bit. Let's look at the uprising itself, the circumstances surrounding it. Because there are some unanswered questions here that are really intriguing.
Oh, yeah. Like the term Elxinct, for example. It's used to describe Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's group, but its meaning is pretty unclear.
Unclear how?
Were they wealthy commoners, people who were exempt from forced labor, displaced individuals looking for work? We don't really know for sure.
And then there's the way Sima Guang, who wrote the Zizi Tongjian, he describes their conscription he leaves out a crucial character,
Hmm.
which makes us question whether they were actually being punished or just fulfilling a normal obligation.
And the geography is another puzzle. They supposedly passed through Days Township on the way to Xiang, which doesn't make sense geographically.
It's like trying to solve a mystery with missing pieces.
Exactly. But that's what makes it so interesting. We have to think critically, consider different interpretations.
So lots of questions, not many clear answers. Where do we even begin to make sense of all this?
Well, there is a theory proposed by historian Qin Dynasty, a very compelling theory.
Which is?
He thinks El Zunkel might actually refer to Binming, meaning displaced people essentially living as sojourners, and this could explain a lot.
Totally.
Remember, the Qin dynasty was all about control, strict household registration, limits on hired labor, plus they always needed more manpower. So it makes sense that there would be a lot of people on the move looking for work.
Makes sense. And Chen Sheng, he was from the Han region, right?
Yeah.
But he ended up working as a hired laborer in the Chu region where the uprising began.
Right, and Xindiang's theory also fits with the dialect of Chen Sheng's companions, plus it makes the journey to Yueyang geographically plausible.
So this Binming theory, it seems to answer a lot of questions. But is it definitive?
We have to be careful. Historical sources are limited. So even with this theory, we're dealing with speculation.
Right, right. It's a good reminder that history isn't always about finding concrete answers.
Exactly. It's about making reasoned guesses, acknowledging the unknowns, accepting that the past can be just as messy and complicated as the present.
Well said. We've only scratched the surface of this fascinating story. There's so much more to uncover. Join us next time as we delve deeper into Qin Dynasty's theory and examine the events of the uprising itself. Okay, so we're back, and we're still digging into Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's rebellion. And I gotta say, this theory that they were part of the Binmeng, these displaced people looking for work, it's really changing how I see this whole uprising.
It definitely adds another layer to the social dynamics at play. So let's see how this theory fits with what happened next. The sources tell us that both Chen Sheng and Wu Guang were appointed as Tuntangs, in charge of these 900 conscripts heading north to Yueyang.
Kungtangs, I've never heard that term. What does that even mean?
Well, basically they were leaders, like responsible for these 900 men, which, makes you think that's not exactly a low-level position, right?
Yeah, you'd think they'd have to have some experience to be put in charge of that many people.
Right. Some scholars even argue that they must have already achieved a certain rank within the Qin military, based on their past accomplishments and all that.
But wouldn't that contradict the idea that they were being punished or exiled? Like, if they were already successful in the military, why would they be in this situation in the first place?
See, that's the thing about history. Sometimes the pieces don't fit perfectly. It's a puzzle where some pieces are always going to be missing.
It's like we're playing detective, trying to piece together the story with all these clues and gaps in the evidence. It's fun, though.
Absolutely. And that's what keeps us coming back for more, right? It's this constant process of discovery. You never know when some new piece of information might pop up and totally change our understanding.
So true. Okay, but for now, with all these unknowns, let's get to the heart of the matter, the uprising itself. What was the trigger? What made these guys finally say, enough is enough?
Well, you have to remember, these 900 conscripts, Chen Sheng and Wu Guang included, they were in a pretty bad spot. They're being forced to march to this distant outpost, probably under horrible conditions, and with a strict deadline.
Right. The source mentions heavy rains delaying them.
Yeah, which basically seals their fate. Because, Qin law was very harsh. If they didn't reach their destination on time, they were facing execution.
Wow, talk about pressure.
Right. And they know this. They're desperate. They're scared. And Chen Sheng and Wu Guang, they see an opportunity. They see a chance to rally their fellow conscripts.
They realize they're stronger together than they are alone, right?
Exactly. And they appeal to their shared grievances. They tap into this resentment that's already simmering beneath the surface, this anger toward the Qin.
Didn't they also use some pretty clever tactics?
Yeah.
Like to inspire their followers?
Oh, you're talking about the fish with the inscription.
Yeah, the one that said, Chen Sheng shall be king. And then there was something about a fox, too, right?
Oh, yeah. Supposedly, a fox was heard crying out, Da Chu shall rise again.
I mean, come on, how convenient is that?
Well, whether those things actually happened or were embellished later is up for debate. But the point is, they worked.
Yeah, they created this feeling of destiny, this idea that Chen Sheng was chosen to lead this rebellion.
And the conscripts, they're desperate for hope. So they revolt, they kill their guards, and they proclaim Chen Sheng their leader.
And from there, things escalate quickly.
Oh, yeah. The rebellion spreads like wildfire. Word gets out, and soon other groups are joining them. Commoners, former nobles, escaped convicts, all united under this banner of rebellion.
It's amazing how this one act of defiance in some random township could trigger such a huge movement.
It shows the power of a shared cause. It shows that people from all walks of life can come together when they have a common enemy.
And it reminds us that revolutions can start in the most unexpected places, from the smallest spark. So, what happens next? How do they actually go about fighting the mighty Qin?
Well, they combine military strategy with political savvy. They understand that the Qin forces are stretched thin. They take advantage of weak supply lines, demoralize troops.
So they weren't just fighting battles, they were playing the game.
Exactly. And they knew how important it was to win over the people. So as they march through these different territories, they liberate communities, they establish a sense of justice.
Sounds like a classic guerrilla warfare tactic, using speed and surprise to their advantage.
It was incredibly effective. For a while, they seemed unstoppable, but as the rebellion grew larger and more ambitious, problems started to arise.
Like what, internal conflicts?
Yeah, exactly. Keeping everyone unified became really difficult. You have all these different groups with different goals, and power struggles start to emerge.
Success can be its own worst enemy, right? What about Chen Sheng himself? How did he handle all this newfound power?
Well, his ambition grows right along with his influence. He declares himself king, which rubs some people the wrong way.
Yeah, I can see how that would alienate some of his supporters. Like, they're fighting for freedom from tyranny, and he just creates another one.
It's that classic tale, isn't it? The corrupting influence of power. And it's kind of tragic because the same drive that made him a successful rebel leader also leads to his downfall.
But even though Chen Sheng's reign was short-lived, his impact was huge, right?
Absolutely. He lit a fire that couldn't be extinguished. The Qin Dynasty, they were already weakened, and this rebellion just pushes them over the edge.
So it wasn't just Chen Sheng and Wu Guang that brought down the Qin. They were more like the final straw.
Right. The Qin Empire was already crumbling under its own weight, and this rebellion was just that final blow. But okay, before we get to the fall of the Qin, we have to talk about what happens next. Who steps into the power vacuum?
Because someone has to fill that void. Right then. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the aftermath of the rebellion and the rise of new players who shaped the future of China. We've been exploring Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's rebellion, and it's clear their actions really shook the Qin dynasty to its core. Last time we were talking about how this rebellion just exposed all the weaknesses that were already there. So now the big question is, how did the Qin Empire actually fall apart?
Well, it's important to remember, like you said, it wasn't just about the rebellion itself. Qin Ershi's, his brutal reign had created so much fear and instability even within the ruling class. And his crazy spending on projects like the Yipang Palace, that didn't help either. The treasury was basically empty, and the people were beyond fed up.
Right. And let's not forget about those Qin armies. They were spread out all across this vast empire, trying to maintain control over all those territories that had been conquered. So when Chen Sheng and Wu Guang started their rebellion, it was like this domino effect.
Yeah, you can imagine rebellions popping up everywhere, fueled by years of pent-up anger and frustration. It's amazing how one small act of defiance in Days Township could lead to such a widespread upheaval. The whole political landscape of China was shifting.
So the Qin dynasty is on its last legs. What happens next? Who fills that power vacuum?
Well, this is where we meet a really fascinating character, Shang Yu. He was from a noble family in Chu, one of the states that had been conquered by the Qin. And when all this chaos starts, he sees his chance. He raises an army, a powerful army.
He sounds pretty formidable.
Yeah.
How did he approach things differently from Chen Sheng?
Well, Chen Sheng was all about establishing his own kingdom. But Shang Yu, he was more strategic. He forms alliances with other rebel leaders. They all agree on one thing. The Qin gotta go.
Strength in numbers, right?
Not
Smart move. Did it work?
This alliance was a turning point. Shang Yu was a brilliant military strategist and a natural leader. People were drawn to him. And he starts winning victories against the Qin. Big victories. The Battle of Julu in 207 BCE, that was a crushing defeat for the Qin, and it really paved the way for the final assault on the Qin capital.
So what about Qin Ershi? What happened to him? Did he go down fighting?
Sadly, no. He was trapped. Betrayed by his own advisor, Zhao Gao, no less. And with his empire collapsing around him, he takes his own life.
Wow. It's a reminder that power's fleeting. And being a leader, especially in times of crisis, it comes with a heavy burden. But okay, the Qin dynasty is over. What happens to China? Does Xing Yu just take over?
It's not that simple. Shang Yu, he's definitely in a strong position. He's the leader of the most powerful army. But his vision for China, it runs into some problems. He divides up the former Qin territory into 18 kingdoms, tries to create this new order based on a decentralized feudal system.
So kind of like going back to the way things were before the Qin unified everything?
Yeah, exactly. But it was a mistake. One of his rivals, Liu Bang, he saw things differently. Liu Bang was ambitious and really cunning. He'd worked his way up through the ranks of the rebellion, and he believed in a strong central government. And he wasn't afraid to challenge Shang Yu.
So it becomes more than just about getting rid of the Qin. It's about who gets to decide what China's future will look like.
Exactly. And this conflict, it's called the Chu-Han contention. It lasts for 4 years, a real clash of personalities, ideologies, everything. And in the end, Liu Bang wins. He establishes the Han Dynasty, which would rule China for centuries.
Wow. So even though Chen Sheng and Guang didn't live to see the Qin Dynasty fall, they were the ones who set everything in motion. What happened to their legacy? How are they remembered?
Their rebellion might have been crushed, but their legacy, that lived on. The Han emperors, they learned from the Qin's mistakes, they were more moderate, they emphasized Confucian values, and they focused on unity and stability. All things that the Qin had lacked.
It's incredible to think about how this short period of rebellion, this small spark, had such a long-lasting impact. It really changed the course of Chinese history.
It shows that even small events can have huge consequences. And it reminds us that people who fight for change, they can make a real difference, even if they don't see the results in their lifetime.
That's a powerful message and a great note to end on. So thanks everyone for joining us on this deep dive into Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's uprising. It's a story full of twists and turns, and it really shows how even the mightiest empires can fall.